I asked the elite lawyer for a $500 pro bono favor. He called security, glanced at my financial background check, and dropped his phone. You're worth $88 million. Before I explain how a broke, ramen-eating indie coder like me suddenly had the GDP of a small island nation sitting quietly in her dormant checking account, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, if you love seeing arrogant, untouchable elitists get exactly what they deserve, you are going to want to stick around for every single second of this story. Let's rewind. The air inside the grand lobby of Sterling and Vance smelled distinctly of old money, polished mahogany, and ruthless intimidation. Located on the penthouse floor of the city's most expensive high-rise, this wasn't just a law firm. It was a fortress for the ultra-wealthy. The floors were cut from seamless, imported Italian marble. The walls were lined with original abstract paintings that probably cost more than the collective organs of everyone in my neighborhood. Everywhere I looked, I saw men in $10,000 bespoke suits and women carrying crocodile skin handbags that required a spot on a 5-year waiting list. And then, there was me. I was standing dead center in this temple of wealth, wearing a faded, oversized thrift store hoodie, a pair of jeans that had seen better days, and canvas sneakers held together by duct tape and sheer willpower. I was a walking, breathing stain on their pristine aesthetic. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly Botoxed features, was already staring at me with a look of thinly veiled disgust, her manicured finger hovering dangerously close to the silent alarm under her desk. I knew I didn't belong here. My pulse was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but desperation makes you do crazy things. I was fighting an illegal, entirely fabricated $500 eviction fee from a ruthless slumlord who was threatening to throw my belongings onto the street by Friday. Every public defender and legal aid clinic in the city was booked solid for the next 6 months. In a moment of blind, naive panic, I had walked into the most vicious, high-profile corporate law firm in the state, praying that some hotshot lawyer might want to do a quick 5-minute pro bono letter, just to write it off on their taxes for good PR. That was my first catastrophic mistake. "Excuse me, you want what?" The voice sliced through the hushed, refined hum of the lobby like a jagged razor blade. It belonged to Arthur Vance, a senior partner whose name was on the wall. He was a man in his late 50s with slicked-back silver hair, a custom-tailored charcoal suit, and a heavy, solid gold Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist. He had been walking through the lobby, laughing and holding court with 2 billionaire hedge fund managers. When I foolishly stepped into his path and held out my crumpled eviction notice, he didn't take the paper. He didn't even look at it. He just stopped, slowly looking me up and down, as if I were a piece of rotting garbage that had somehow blown in through the revolving doors. I just need a standard cease and desist letter. Istema. My cheeks burning with a hot, prickling humiliation as the wealthy clients around us stopped to watch the spectacle. It's a cinque sute dispute. I know your firm occasionally does pro bono work for the community. It would only take 5 minutes of your time. Sir, please. Arthur Vance let out a dry, theatrical chuckle. He turned to his billionaire clients, shaking his head as if I had just told a hilarious joke. They smirked in unison. Pro bono work, Vance sneered, turning his dead, shark-like eyes back to me. He raised his voice, ensuring that every single person in the massive lobby could hear him. Listen to me very carefully. Sweetheart, my retainer starts at $250. 000, I charge $2. 000 an hour, just to pick up a telephone. We represent multinational conglomerates and tech titans. We do not run a charity for street trash who can't figure out how to pay their rent. The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The humiliation was instantly suffocating. I felt tears welling up, stinging the corners of my eyes. But I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I was broke, but I wasn't going to let this monster have the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I just needed a little help, I whispered, taking a step back, clutching my eviction notice to my chest. Security, Vance barked, not even looking at me anymore. He snapped his fingers dismissively toward two hulking men in dark suits stationed near the private elevators. "Get this vagrant out of my lobby, and have the cleaning staff disinfect the marble she was standing on." The two massive guards immediately started marching toward me, their faces grim and unyielding. I panicked. I didn't want any trouble. I just wanted to disappear. But before the guards could grab my arms, a young, frantic-looking paralegal rushed out from behind the reception desk, holding a sleek iPad. "Mr. Vance." "Sir, wait," she squeaked, her voice trembling as she adjusted her glasses. "Firm compliance policy. We have to log every walk-in contact into the system before dismissing them. To prevent malpractice liabilities or conflict of interest claims, I just need to run a quick preliminary financial intake on her ID." Vance rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in his head. He let out a loud, exasperated sigh. "Fine, do it. You have 10 seconds before I have her thrown onto the pavement." He pulled out his phone, a custom, diamond-encrusted device that looked heavier than a brick, and began scrolling through his emails, completely ignoring my existence. The guards stood on either side of me, arms crossed, boxing me in. The paralegal turned to me with an apologetic wince. "May I have your ID and social security number?" "Please. It just takes a second. It links to standard banking records to verify your identity and liquid asset bracket." With trembling fingers, I handed her my cracked, faded driver's license and softly recited my SSN. I felt sick to my stomach. I knew exactly what that screen was going to show. It was going to show a checking account with exactly $14.22 to my name. It was going to officially confirm what Vance had just declared to the whole room: I was an absolute nobody. The paralegal tapped the screen. "Processing," she muttered under her breath. A second later, the system pinged. The paralegal looked down at the iPad. Suddenly, she stopped breathing. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. She let out a sharp, choked gasp. Stumbling backwards so fast, her heel caught on the carpet, and she almost dropped the tablet. Vance scowled, highly irritated by the interruption. "What is wrong with you, Chloe? Is she a convicted felon? Does she have a negative net worth? Just kick her out." "Sir," the paralegal stammered, her face instantly draining of all color until she looked like a ghost. She was physically shaking, her eyes darting violently between the screen and my faded thrift store hoodie. "Sir, you need to look at this. Right now." Annoyed, Vance snatched the iPad roughly from her hands. "Incompetent fools. All of you," he muttered, adjusting his designer glasses as he looked down at the financial asset readout. I watched his face. I will never, for the rest of my life, I forget what happened in the next 5 seconds. First, Vance's smug, predatory smirk vanished, replaced by a deep furrow of confusion. Then his jaw actually dropped open. The color rushed out of his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. A thick bead of cold sweat instantly materialized on his forehead, rolling down his temple. His pupils dilated in pure, unadulterated shock. His hands began to shake. A violent, uncontrollable tremor took over his fingers. He stared at the screen, completely paralyzed. Crack. His custom, diamond-encrusted phone slipped from his numb fingers and shattered into a dozen pieces against the unforgiving Italian marble floor. He didn't even flinch. He didn't look down. He just kept staring at the iPad, his chest heaving as if he had forgotten how to breathe. "Security," Vance choked out, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its former booming authority. "Stop. Step away from her. Right now." The guards, thoroughly confused, immediately took a step back. Vance practically shoved his billionaire clients out of the way. He stumbled toward me, his expensive leather shoes squeaking awkwardly on the polished floor. He bowed a deep, frantic, desperate bow. And when he looked up at me, the condescension in his eyes was entirely gone. In its place was a mixture of absolute terror, awe, and overwhelming greed. "Mom, I apologize. There has been a profound, unforgivable misunderstanding," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the words. Our system, it shows your liquid cash balance. Mum, you're worth $88. Sasan RYU. $75-88 million. The number echoed in my skull, deafening and absurd. My brain completely short-circuited, entirely incapable of processing the mathematical reality of what Arthur Vance had just whispered, but to truly understand the sheer, mind-bending gravity of that moment and why Vance's sudden terror was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. You have to understand what my life looked like exactly 72 hours earlier. Let's rewind to Tuesday morning. I woke up shivering violently. It was barely 40 degrees inside my tiny, dilapidated studio apartment on the wrong side of the city. I was huddled under 3 thin, mismatched thrift store blankets, wearing a faded college hoodie, staring at the ceiling as frost literally formed on the inside of my single-pane window. I was a freelance indie coder. I took odd jobs building basic websites for local bakeries or fixing messy code for cheap startups. But my last client had ghosted me, leaving me with exactly $14.22 to my name. That morning, my breakfast was a 45-cent pack of artificial beef-flavored instant ramen. I didn't even have the electricity to boil the water properly, so I let the noodles soak in lukewarm tap water until they were soft enough to chew. Every single penny I had was meticulously calculated. I knew exactly how many days I could survive before starvation became a medical emergency. The crushing, suffocating weight of poverty isn't just about hunger, it's a constant and just too low-level hum of panic that lives in the back of your throat. It makes you invisible. It strips away your dignity until you feel like an apology for simply existing. Then came the knock on the door. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a heavy, aggressive pounding that made the cheap drywall shudder. I opened it to find Gary. My slumlord. Gary was a greasy, oversized man who constantly smelled of stale cigar smoke, cheap cologne, and unearned arrogance. He owned a dozen decaying buildings in the city and made his living by terrorizing low-income tenants who didn't have the resources to fight back. He didn't say a word to me. He just slapped a piece of paper onto my chest and smirked. I looked down at it. It was a formal notice of eviction. Attached to it was a fabricated entirely illegal invoice. What is this? I asked, my voice trembling. Despite my best efforts to keep it steady, I paid my rent. Gary, I gave you every last dollar I had on the first of the month. Gary leaned against the doorframe, chewing on a toothpick. His eyes filled with a cruel, predatory gleam. Read the fine print. Sweetheart. That's a $500 emergency maintenance and groundskeeping penalty. You left a trash bag in the hallway for 10 minutes yesterday. It's a violation of the lease. We don't even have grounds, I protested, panic rising in my chest. This building doesn't have a yard. And the maintenance guy quit 6 months ago. You can't just invent a $500 fee to throw me out. Gary stepped closer, his massive frame blocking the light from the hallway. I don't care if you have to sell your plasma, scrub toilet, or stand on a street corner. Little girl, you owe me $500 by Friday morning. If I don't have the cash in my hand, I am legally changing the locks, and I'm throwing your precious computer and your clothes into the dumpster out back. He turned and walked away, his heavy boots echoing down the hallway. I slid down the wall until I hit the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. $500. To someone like Arthur Vance, $500 was the tip he left on a mediocre steak dinner. To me, it was an impossible fortune. It was the difference between having a roof over my head and sleeping on a park bench in the freezing rain. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of absolute, frantic desperation. I walked miles through the freezing sleet to every legal aid clinic, public defender's office, and pro bono charity in the city. Every single door was slammed in my face. The legal system for the poor is a broken, overloaded machine. At the downtown legal aid center, a tired, overworked receptionist barely glanced at my eviction notice. Honey, we have a 6-month waitlist just for a consultation, unless you have $2.500 for a standard private retainer. No lawyer is going to look at a $500 small claims dispute. The system is rigged. You're better off just packing your bags. By Thursday afternoon, I was thoroughly broken. I was soaked to the bone from the rain. My duct-tape sneakers were squishing with freezing puddle water, and I hadn't eaten anything in 2 days. I was wandering through the financial district, completely numb. When I looked up and saw it, the Sterling and Vance Tower. It was a gleaming, 60-story monolith of black glass and steel that pierced the gray clouds like a spear. It was a citadel of absolute, untouchable power. I had read an article in a discarded newspaper once that said elite corporate law firms often required their partners to perform a certain number of pro bono hours every year for tax write-offs and public relations. A crazy, naive thought wormed its way into my desperate mind. What if I just asked? A cease and desist letter on Sterling and Vance letterhead would terrify Gary so badly he would drop the fake fee instantly. It would take a lawyer 5 minutes to draft. They were rich. They had everything. Surely, they could spare a crumb of humanity for someone who was drowning. That naive hope is what led me to push through those heavy, revolving brass doors. The moment I stepped into that lobby, the temperature shifted. It wasn't just the climate control. It was the atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of privilege. I stood there, a dripping, shivering mess in a faded hoodie, surrounded by a symphony of wealth. I felt hundreds of eyes locking onto me. The wealthy clients, the paralegals, the security guards, they all looked at me, not as a human being in need of help, but as a pest, a disease that had somehow breached their sterile environment. And then, Arthur Vance had walked over. When he looked at me, he didn't just see poverty. He saw an opportunity to entertain his billionaire clients. He made a grand, theatrical show of breaking me down. When he called me street trash and announced to the entire lobby that his retainer was $250, 000, he wanted me to feel the full, crushing weight of my insignificance. He wanted to remind me that in his world, my life, my home, and my suffering were completely worthless. I remember the exact feeling of the tears threatening to spill over as the security guards boxed me in. I remember the paralyzing shame of handing my cracked ID to the paralegal, bracing myself for the final humiliation when the screen revealed my pathetic $14.22 bank balance. I was ready to be thrown out into the cold rain. I was ready to accept my defeat and prepare to live on the streets. But the universe, as it turned out, had a spectacularly twisted sense of humor, because when that paralegal tapped the screen, my bank balance didn't show $14. It showed a number so astronomically, violently huge that it shattered the reality of everyone in that room. And as Arthur Vance stood there, sweating, trembling, and bowing to the very street trash he had just ordered to be thrown out, I realized my life had just permanently irreversibly changed. Please, right this way. Miss, allow me to personally escort you to the VIP penthouse. We have so much to discuss. Arthur Vance's voice was barely a squeak. The booming, theatrical baritone he had used to humiliate me just moments ago had completely evaporated, replaced by the frantic, breathy desperation of a man who realized he had just stepped on a live landmine. The two massive security guards, who had been mere seconds away from physically dragging me out into the freezing rain, now stood frozen. Exchanging bewildered glances, Vance frantically waved them off. Dismissed. Get out of her sight. And someone clean up this mess. Hey, he said, kicking the shattered remains of his diamond-encrusted phone under a leather sofa. He practically threw his body weight against the heavy mahogany doors of the private, keycard-only executive elevator. Holding it open for me, he gestured for me to enter with a sweeping, subservient bow that was so low it bordered on comical. I stepped inside. The doors slid shut, sealing us in a perfectly silent, wood-paneled cube. The ride up to the 60th floor was the longest 90 seconds of my life. The air was thick with the scent of Vance's expensive cologne and his sudden, overwhelming panic sweat. He stood rigidly in the corner, wringing his hands together like a guilty child, his eyes darting frantically to my face, desperate for a smile, a nod, anything to indicate that I wasn't about to buy his firm just to fire him. I cannot express how deeply, profoundly sorry I am for my earlier misjudgment. Mom, Vance babbled. the silence clearly eating him alive. In our line of work, dealing with corporate espionage and high-level extortion, we are trained to be overly cautious. I completely misread the situation. I mistook your beautifully understated IMI stow avant-garde sense of fashion for something else. It's brilliant. Really? The stealth wealth aesthetic. Mark Zuckerberg wears gray t-shirts. You wear duct-taped canvas. Genius. Please, forgive my absolute ignorance. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My tongue felt like it was made of lead. The elevator chimed, and the doors glided open into a sprawling, glass-walled boardroom that looked out over the entire sweeping skyline of the city. The floor was covered in a hand-woven Persian rug that looked so incredibly expensive. I felt a spike of guilt stepping on it with my squishing sneakers. Vance rushed ahead, nearly tripping over his own custom Italian loafers, to pull out a massive, imported leather chair at the head of a sprawling mahogany conference table. Please, sit. Make yourself comfortable, he pleaded. Can I get you anything? We have a private Michelin-starred chef on standby. A Wagyu steak, some beluga caviar. Perhaps a glass of vintage Dom Perignon to warm you up. Just show me the screen. I managed to whisper, my voice cracking under the weight of my own terror. Show me what your paralegal saw. Vance swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He pulled a secondary tablet from the center of the conference table, tapped in his master override credentials, and gently slid the device across the polished wood toward me. Of course, as you know, our elite client intake system is directly synced with the Federal Banking Reserve Network to verify liquid assets before we establish high net worth retainers. This pulls directly from your primary checking account. I looked down. The screen was brutally bright, and right there, displayed in crisp, undeniable digital font, was the exact same number, current available balance. 88美元, 400 115. My stomach violently dropped into my shoes. The sprawling city skyline outside the window began to spin. 88 million. I counted the digits again, my vision blurring, praying that my freezing, starved brain had just hallucinated a few extra zeros. 1, 2, 3. 8 digits. I squeezed my eyes shut, fully expecting to wake up on my lumpy, freezing mattress. But when I opened them, the number was still there, mocking me, terrifying me. I wasn't rich. I was a freelance coder who had survived the last 3 weeks on artificial beef broth. 2 hours ago, I had exactly $14, 22 to my name. A cold, sharp spike of adrenaline pierced through my chest. This is a glitch. My panicked brain screamed. A massive, catastrophic banking error. Or worse, my dormant account has been hacked by a cartel, or a Russian syndicate, or some dark web crypto ring for money laundering. The federal government didn't mess around with $88 million. The FBI was probably already tracking my location. SWAT teams were probably gearing up to kick down the door of my dilapidated apartment. I was going to federal prison for the rest of my life for wire fraud. And I wouldn't even be able to afford a public defender to argue my case. I started hyperventilating. I gripped the armrests of the heavy leather chair, so hard my knuckles turned completely white, my breathing coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Vance watched me, and in that moment, as he saw the pure, unadulterated panic in my eyes, his entire demeanor shifted again. The groveling, terrified apology vanished. He was a shark, and he had just smelled blood in the water. He realized I was overwhelmed, vulnerable, and completely out of my depth. He didn't know why I was panicking over my own money, but he knew exactly how to exploit it. He leaned across the mahogany table, his eyes gleaming with a sickening, predatory greed. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a sleek, gold-embossed document, sliding it toward me, along with a heavy Mont Blanc fountain pen. Listen to me. My dear, Vance purred, his tone suddenly adopting the fake, soothing cadence of a protective father figure. Having this kind of sudden, immense wealth, it's dangerous. You are a target now. Every vulture, every tax auditor, and every gold digger in this city will try to bleed you dry. But I can protect you. Sterling and Vance can build an impenetrable legal fortress around you. He tapped the thick gold pen against the signature line of the contract. Just sign this exclusive retainer agreement. We will immediately transfer those funds into offshore trusts and shell corporations where the government can't touch them. My standard high net worth protection retainer is a mere 20% of liquid assets. That's roughly $17. 6 millions. A very small price to pay for absolute peace of mind. Wouldn't you agree? The audacity was so immense, it actually snapped me out of my panic attack. He wanted $17 million. This man who had literally called me street trash and ordered security to toss me into the rain not 10 minutes ago was now trying to legally extort me out of a fortune, banking on my fear to force my signature. He was trying to rob me blind before I even knew if the money was real. Survival instinct, honed by years of poverty, kicked in with a vengeance. I need air, I gasped, standing up so fast. The heavy leather chair screeched loudly against the pristine Persian rug. Wait, miss. Please. You shouldn't leave this building without legal protection. The liability is enormous. Vance cried out, scrambling to his feet. His eyes locked onto the pen I hadn't touched. I didn't listen. Ibolde. I sprinted out of the boardroom, ignoring his shouts, echoing down the marble hallway. I threw myself into the nearest stairwell, my heart pounding in my throat, and ran down 4 flights of stairs until I found a service elevator. I smashed the ground floor button, leaving Arthur Vance and his predatory $17 million trap behind. When I burst out of the service exit into the freezing, rain-slicked alleyway behind the tower, I didn't stop running. I didn't care about the eviction notice anymore. I didn't care about the cold. There was only one place I needed to go to figure out if I was a billionaire or a federal fugitive. I sprinted 6 blocks straight toward the towering headquarters of First National Fidelity, my bank. I was going to find out where the hell $88 million came from. Even if they arrested me on the spot, I burst through the heavy, revolving brass doors of First National Fidelity's downtown headquarters like a woman actively fleeing a crime scene. My thrift store hoodie was plastered to my skin, completely soaked from the freezing rain. My duct-tape sneakers squelched loudly against the pristine, echoing terrazzo floor of the grand banking hall. First National wasn't just a local branch. It was a sprawling, neoclassical monument to high finance, complete with towering marble pillars and vaulted ceilings that made you feel incredibly small. At that exact moment, I didn't just feel small. I felt like a fugitive. I bypassed the velvet ropes and marched straight up to the head teller's desk. An elevated mahogany station, guarded by a stern-looking woman in a crisp, conservative blouse. She looked up from her monitor, her eyes immediately zeroing in on my dripping wet clothes and frantic, wild-eyed expression. Her hand subtly drifted toward the phone. I need to speak to the highest-ranking manager in this building. Right now, I demanded, my voice shaking so badly I sounded completely unhinged. I need you to freeze my checking account. I think it's being used by a cartel to launder money. And I need a paper trail proving I have nothing to do with it before the federal government arrests me. The teller frowned, her expression hardening into a mask of bureaucratic annoyance. Mum, if you have a dispute over an overdraft fee or a compromised debit card, you need to call the 1-800 fraud number on the back of your card. The regional director does not handle walk-in retail disputes, and you are dripping rainwater all over the counter. Scan my ID. Islamil mi battered. Water-damaged driver's license onto the thick bulletproof glass between us. Just scan it and look at the balance. I am not here about an overdraft. Rolling her eyes with the exhaustion of someone who dealt with crazy people all day, she snatched my ID and swiped the magnetic strip through her encrypted keyboard reader. Name and social, she asked in a bored monotone. I rattled off my information. She hit the enter key. I braced myself. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting the blare of sirens, or the loud, commanding shouts of bank security tackling me to the floor. Instead, there was absolute silence. I opened one eye. The teller wasn't rolling her eyes anymore. She was staring at her monitor as if it had just grown a second head. The standard blue banking interface had completely vanished, instantly overridden by a flashing, solid gold screen bearing a massive VIP crest. The teller gasped, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. She looked at the screen, then slowly looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of profound shock and deep, sudden reverence. Without saying a single word to me, she slammed her hand down on a silent, concealed button under her desk. Oh God, I thought, my heart plummeting into my stomach. She pressed the panic button. The FBI is already in the building. I'm done for. But no police officers came rushing in. No sirens wailed. Instead, a heavy, unmarked steel door behind the teller line clicked open. Two massive, heavily armed private security contractors stepped out, followed closely by an older, incredibly distinguished man wearing a bespoke three-piece suit and silver wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't walk. He glided across the marble floor with undeniable authority. He completely ignored the long line of wealthy clients waiting for service. His eyes locked onto me, and to my utter bewilderment, his face broke into an expression of profound relief. "Ms. Miller," the man asked, his voice smooth and remarkably gentle. "I am Marcus Harrison, the Regional Executive Director of First National Fidelity. Please, come with me immediately. We've been trying to track you down for nearly 3 months." He didn't wait for an answer. He gestured for the armed guards to flank me, and together, they escorted me away from the prying eyes of the crowded lobby, leading me to a private, secure elevator hidden behind the vault doors. We descended deep into the subterranean levels of the bank. The elevator opened into a massive, climate-controlled steel vault room furnished with nothing but a sleek glass table and 2 plush leather chairs. It was completely soundproof. I collapsed into one of the chairs, burying my face in my trembling hands. "Look, Mr. Harrison, whatever crime was committed, I swear to God I didn't do it," I blurted out, the words tumbling out of my mouth in a panicked rush. "I build cheap websites for local bakeries. I barely passed high school math. I don't know where that money came from, and I haven't touched a single cent of it. Just send it back to whoever it belongs to before I end up in federal prison." Marcus Harrison just chuckled. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was a warm, genuinely reassuring sound that echoed softly off the thick steel walls. He sat down across from me, adjusted his glasses, and placed a thick, leather-bound portfolio onto the glass table. "Miss Miller, you can take a deep breath. Nobody is going to arrest you," Harrison said gently, pushing a stack of heavily notarized, official corporate documents across the table toward me. "You haven't committed a crime. There is no cartel. There is no money laundering. In fact, you are the sole, undisputed, and legal owner of every single penny in that account. That $88, 75 is entirely yours. Clean, verified, and completely legal." I slowly lifted my head, staring at him through my wet hair. "How that's impossible. I have $14 to my name. I was eating artificial beef broth for breakfast." Harrison smiled, leaning forward and tapping a specific page in the dossier. "Tell me, Miss Miller, do you happen to remember a little indie video game you created called Neon Samurai? The Last Ronin Retro. Pixel art role-playing game." My jaw practically hit the glass table. "Neon Samurai. Yeah," I whispered, my mind struggling to reach back a decade into the past. "I coded that in my cramped college dorm room 10 years ago. It was just a stupid passion project to teach myself C++. The physics engine was terrible, and the final boss would glitch through the floor half the time. I uploaded the source code and the game files to some random international tech forum and completely forgot about it." "Well," Harrison said, his eyes gleaming with professional admiration, "you might have forgotten about it, but the internet certainly didn't. Over the last 10 years, that terribly buggy game gained a massive, cult-like following in Japan, South Korea, and China. It became a grassroots, mega-viral phenomenon." He slid a beautifully bound, 200-page corporate acquisition contract toward me. It was entirely in Japanese, accompanied by certified, stamped English translations. A massive international gaming conglomerate, An entity on par with Sony or Tencent discovered the IP 3 years ago, Harrison explained, his voice perfectly steady. They wanted to completely rebuild the game, clean up the code, and launch it as their global flagship mobile title. But because you brilliantly embedded an unbreakable, open license royalty tracker deep within your original source code, they couldn't legally monetize it without compensating you. I was speechless. The room was spinning again. But this time, the suffocating terror was entirely gone. In its place was a rushing, electric wave of disbelief. They bought the complete global intellectual property rights, Harrison continued, pointing to a massive figure highlighted in yellow ink. They compiled 10 years of backlogged international royalties, microtransaction dividends, and physical merchandise licensing. They literally spent the last 2 years hiring an army of forensic digital accountants just to track down your dormant IP address, match it to your social security number, and locate this checking account. He turned to the final page of the document. The conglomerate paid the highest tier of international corporate taxes on your behalf before they ever wired the funds. The transfer cleared our federal compliance audits at 3:00 a.m. this morning, Harrison concluded. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a sleek, heavy, jet black titanium debit card, placing it gently on the table in front of me. This is your net payout. You do not owe the IRS a single dime. You, my dear, are officially one of the wealthiest women in this state. I sat perfectly still in the dead silence of the steel vault, staring down at the matte black titanium card. It was heavy. It was beautiful. It was absolute, world-bending power, forged into a tiny rectangle of metal. My mind instantly flashed back to the events of the last 72 hours. It flashed back to my freezing, dilapidated apartment. It flashed back to Gary, my greasy slumlord, threatening to throw all my belongings into a dumpster over a fabricated $500 fee. And then, it flashed back to Arthur Vance. I remembered his smug, predatory grin as he called me street trash. I remembered the way he snapped his fingers to have me thrown out into the rain. And I remembered the sickening, greedy look in his eyes when he slid that retainer across the table, trying to legally rob me of $17 million because he thought I was too stupid and too terrified to know any better. A slow, profoundly calm smile began to spread across my face. The panic, the fear, and the lifetime of feeling small and insignificant, it all evaporated, replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp clarity. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the apex predator, and I had an $88 million set of teeth. I reached out and picked up the black titanium card. The cold metal grounded me. "Mr. Harrison," I said softly, my voice steadier and more commanding than it had ever been in my entire life. "I need to make a very large withdrawal. I have a lawyer I need to hire, and another lawyer I need to completely destroy." Walking out of First National Fidelity, with an $88 million titanium black card burning a hole in my pocket, felt like stepping into an alternate dimension. The freezing city rain was still falling, but it didn't pierce my bones anymore. The towering skyscrapers of the financial district, which had always felt like massive stone giants designed to crush me, now just looked like pieces on a chessboard. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't looking up at the world from the gutter. I was looking at it eye to level. But before I could move on, before I could buy a hot meal or secure a safe place to sleep, there was one piece of unfinished business. Arthur Vance. I knew exactly what kind of man Vance was. I had spent my entire life being stepped on by men like him, men who measured human worth entirely by tax brackets, zip codes, and stock portfolios. He hadn't apologized to me in that penthouse because he felt genuine remorse for treating me like garbage. He apologized because he realized I had enough liquid capital to buy his entire law firm and turn it into a parking lot. He didn't see me as a human being. He saw me as a walking, breathing $17. 6 million payday. I needed to see just how deep his rot went. I needed to test him. I walked to a nearby bus stop shelter, sat on the cold metal bench, and pulled out my cracked, desperately outdated cell phone. I dialed the main number for Sterling and Vance. "Sterling and Vance. How may I direct your call?" the receptionist answered in her crisp, haughty tone. "Hi, this is the woman Arthur Vance met in the lobby earlier today," I said, keeping my voice small and timid. He asked me to call him regarding a retainer." The line went dead silent for a fraction of a second. Then I heard the frantic, panicked clicking of a keyboard. "Of course. Right away. Ma'am, please hold. I am patching you through to Mr. Mena." Vance's private line immediately. It didn't even ring twice before Vance snatched the phone. "My dear," he practically shouted into the receiver, his voice dripping with an artificial, sycophantic warmth that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I was terrified you had walked out of my life forever. Are you safe? Have you spoken to the bank, please? Tell me you haven't signed any documents with anyone else." "I haven't signed anything," I said, playing the part of the overwhelmed, naive girl perfectly. I think I need to come back to your office. Mr. Vance. We really need to talk about my situation." Yes. Absolutely. Come straight up to my private corner office. I will clear my entire afternoon schedule for you. The staff has been instructed to treat you like absolute royalty." 30 minutes later, I walked back through the heavy brass revolving doors of Sterling and Vance. I hadn't changed my clothes. I was still soaking wet, still wearing the same faded thrift store hoodie, and still walking in the same duct-tape sneakers. But the atmosphere in the grand lobby had entirely shifted. The two hulking security guards who had nearly dragged me out by my hair earlier now stood at stiff attention, refusing to make eye contact with me, beads of sweat on their foreheads. The snooty receptionist practically broke her neck bowing as I walked past her desk, gesturing frantically toward the private, VIP keycard elevators. Money didn't just talk in this building, it commanded absolute, unquestioning obedience. I took the elevator up to Vance's private corner office. It was a staggering monument to corporate greed. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city. Dark oak bookshelves lined the walls, and behind a massive, imported marble desk sat Arthur Vance. He leaped to his feet the second I walked in. Come in," he beamed, rushing over to pull up a plush leather chair. On his desk sat a silver tray holding a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon on ice, 2 crystal flutes, and a plate of imported black truffles. I took the liberty of preparing a small celebration. "Welcome to the Sterling and Vance family." He didn't waste a single second. Before I could even sit down completely, he was already sliding that thick, gold-embossed retainer agreement across the marble desk, along with his heavy Mont Blanc fountain pen. Now Vance purred, steepling his fingers and leaning forward, his eyes locked hungrily onto the contract. "All we need is your signature on the dotted line, and my world-class legal team will immediately begin building an impenetrable fortress around your $88 million. We will set up offshore trusts in the Caymans, shell corporations, tax havens. You will never have to worry about a single financial threat for the rest of your natural life. Just sign, my dear." I stared down at the contract. Then I slowly looked up at him. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. I forced my hands to tremble slightly. I let my breathing become shallow and erratic. I channeled every single ounce of fear, despair, and humiliation I had felt when I was just a broke girl facing eviction. I blinked hard until a real tear welled up in the corner of my eye. "Mr. Vance," I whispered, my voice shaking violently. I went to the bank." "Excellent," he smiled greedily, pushing the pen closer to my hand. "And the funds are fully liquid, ready for transfer." "No," I choked out, letting a sob escape my throat. It was a mistake. Horrible. Catastrophic mistake." Vance's smile froze. The crystal glass of champagne he was pouring stopped midair. "Excuse me." The bank director pulled me into the vault. I continued, playing the terrified victim flawlessly, wrapping my arms around myself. "He said there was a massive routing error in their international servers. The money isn't mine. It was supposed to go to some Asian corporate holding company. They completely froze the account. They said, I might even be investigated by the federal government for wire fraud, just because the system flagged my ID." I watched Vance's face. It was like watching a beautiful, elaborate sandcastle collapse under a violent tidal wave. The color instantly drained from his cheeks. His eyes darted around erratically, his brain frantically processing the information, realizing the $17.6 million payday he had already spent in his head was vaporizing into thin air. Froze. The account, he whispered, his voice sounding hollow and raspy. It was a glitch. Yes, I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. I have nothing. I'm exactly where I was this morning. I'm completely broke. Mr. Vance, I only have $14 in my pocket. I looked up at him, clasping my hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture. But you just said we were family now. Right. You said you wanted to protect me. So, since I'm already here, could you please just help me with that $500 eviction notice? Just a quick pro bono letter, please. The silence in the grand office was absolutely deafening. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner sounded like a bomb counting down to 0. Arthur Vance slowly lowered the champagne bottle. He didn't just look disappointed, he looked violently, explosively angry. The mask of the caring, paternal lawyer completely dissolved, peeling away to reveal the arrogant, elitist monster hiding underneath. He snatched the gold-embossed retainer agreement right out from under my hands and violently ripped it in half. Get out. His voice was no longer a smooth purr. It was a low, venomous growl. I blinked, pretending to be shocked, shrinking back in my chair. But Mr. Vance, you just said... I said, get out. Vance roared, his face turning a dark, blotch hue, furious purple. He slammed both fists down on the marble desk so hard the crystal champagne flutes rattled and nearly tipped over. You absolute, worthless waste of my time. A glitch. A routing error. I canceled a lunch meeting with a Saudi tech investor for you. I ordered $2,000 champagne for you. You are nothing but street trash. He stormed around the massive desk, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger mere inches from my face. You actually thought I cared about you. You thought a senior partner at Sterling and Vance would waste a single ounce of breath on a pathetic, broke little girl facing a $500 eviction. I should have you arrested right now for criminal trespassing and fraud. You made me look like a fool in front of my entire staff. He marched over to the heavy oak door, yanked it open, and stepped into the hallway. Security. He bellowed at the top of his lungs. Get up to the penthouse right now. I want this rat dragged out of my building and thrown into the gutter where she belongs. He turned back to me, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred and disgust. If you ever step foot within 100 yards of this building again, I will personally see to it that your slumlord doesn't just evict you, he buries you. Now, take your duct-taped shoes and get out of my sight. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't flinch. Instead, I stood up from the plush leather chair very slowly. I reached into my damp hoodie pocket, casually pulled out a piece of lint, and flicked it onto his pristine Persian rug. I looked at Arthur Vance's red, furious, sweating face, and I smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile. It wasn't an apologetic smile. It was a cold, quiet, terrifyingly dead-eyed smile. The kind of smile a chess grandmaster gives right before they slide their queen across the board and announce checkmate. Vance noticed it. For a split second, his raging tirade faltered. A flicker of deep, unsettling confusion crossed his eyes. Why wasn't she crying? Why wasn't she running away in terror? I didn't say a single word to him. I just maintained that chilling smile, adjusted my faded hoodie, and calmly walked out of his office, casually brushing past the two massive security guards who were running frantically down the hall to grab me. As I stepped onto the elevator and the doors slid shut, cutting off Vance's furious face, I pulled out my phone. I dialed a new number. It was the direct line for Covington and Hayes, the second most powerful law firm in the city, and Sterling and Vance's most bitter, bloodthirsty corporate rival. Hello, I said, my voice as steady and cold as steel. I need to hire a team of aggressive corporate acquisition lawyers today, and I need your best private investigator to look into the personal leverage debts of a man named Arthur Vance. Money is no object. The next 48 hours were an absolute, unadulterated masterclass in corporate bloodsport. While Arthur Vance was undoubtedly sitting in his corner office, sipping his $2,000 champagne and bragging to his junior partners about how he had heroically kicked a mentally unstable squatter out of his building. The invisible, crushing weight of an $88 million machine was already moving to grind his entire existence into dust. The offices of Covington and Hayes didn't smell like sandalwood or old money, they smelled like espresso and predatory aggression. They were the second most powerful law firm in the city, and they lived for one single, defining purpose: cannibalizing Sterling and Vance. When I walked into their high-tech, glass-walled conference room, this time wearing a sharp, tailored black blazer I'd bought off the rack, though I purposely kept my hair slightly messy to maintain the underdog aesthetic, they didn't look at my clothes. They didn't look at my duct-taped shoes. They looked at the verified banking dossier I slid across the table, authenticated by the regional director of First National himself, Evelyn Hayes. The senior managing partner was a woman with silver hair, a razor-sharp jawline, and a gaze that could cut through solid steel. She slowly closed the dossier, took off her reading glasses, and looked at me with a terrifyingly beautiful, predatory grin. "Miss Miller?" Evelyn purred, tapping her manicured nails against the folder. "You have exactly $88. 4325. 75 inches fully liquid. Untethered capital. You don't just have money. You have weaponized liquidity. Tell me, what exactly do you want to do to Arthur Vance? I want you to look into his personal finances," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I don't believe a man who acts like that is actually secure. I want to know who holds his mortgage. I want to know who owns his car. I want to know where his pressure points are." Evelyn didn't even blink. She just pressed an intercom button on her desk. "Get my best forensic accountants and 3 private investigators on Arthur Vance. I want his financial soul on my desk by tomorrow morning." They didn't need until the morning. Byedanaście. 00 p.m. that night. Evelyn called me into her office and dropped a thick, red-tabbed file onto the desk. "You have exceptional instincts, Miss Miller." Evelyn laughed, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. "Arthur Vance isn't a titan of industry. He is a walking, breathing house of cards. The man is a complete and utter fraud." I opened the file, my eyes scanning the heavily highlighted documents. It was all there. Vance was living a life of billionaire-level luxury, but he didn't have the actual cash to back it up. To maintain his image and court his elite clients, he had aggressively leveraged everything he owned. His spectacular $12 million mansion in the hills, heavily mortgaged. His $3 million yacht financed on a high-interest bridge loan. Even his custom Patek Philippe watches were bought on credit. He is currently drowning in $22.5 million of toxic, high-interest personal debt, Evelyn explained, pointing to a specific contract. His primary lender is a predatory private equity group called Apex Capital. Vance has been desperately trying to secure a massive corporate loan this week just to cover his quarterly obligations. If he misses his payment on Friday, Apex has the legal right to seize his assets and trigger a complete financial liquidation. He is terrified. I stared at the name Apex Capital. A beautiful idea clicked into place in my mind. I reached into my bag and pulled out my heavy, black titanium card. I placed it gently onto the center of Evelyn's desk. "Contact Apex Capital," I commanded. "Form an anonymous shell company called Ronin Holdings. I want to buy his debt, buy his mortgage, buy the lien on his yacht, buy the lease on his firm's office space. Pay Apex a 15% premium above market value so they don't ask questions. I want to legally own every single thing Arthur Vance touches." Evelyn Hayes smiled a smile that was purely demonic. "Consider it done." By Friday evening, the trap was fully set, and the steel jaws were ready to snap shut. Friday night was the annual Metropolitan Gala, the single most exclusive, elite high society event of the year. It was a strict, invitation-only charity auction attended by billionaires, politicians, and the city's highest-ranking corporate overlords. It was also the place where Arthur Vance was planning to schmooze a banking executive to save his collapsing financial empire. I arrived at the gala at 9. Sufur PM. But I wasn't wearing a faded thrift store hoodie anymore, thanks to an emergency. Blank check appointment with the city's top celebrity stylist. I stepped out of a sleek, blacked-out Maybach wearing a breathtaking, custom-fitted, emerald green silk gown that screamed quiet luxury. My hair was flawlessly styled, and I wore a single, exquisite diamond necklace that caught the light of the paparazzi flashbulbs. I looked like royalty. I looked untouchable. I glided past the velvet ropes, my name now, legally holding enough weight to bypass the guest list entirely. The doors to the grand ballroom opened, revealing a sea of crystal chandeliers, strength quartets, and pure, concentrated wealth. It didn't take me long to find him. Arthur Vance was holding court near the center of the room, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand, laughing loudly with a circle of powerful hedge fund managers. He looked incredibly smug, completely unaware that the ground beneath his custom Italian loafers had already crumbled. I took a deep breath, keeping my posture perfectly straight, and walked slowly across the ballroom floor. As I approached, the people in Vance's circle began to notice me. The laughter died down. The hedge fund managers turned to stare, captivated by the sudden appearance of a beautiful, mysterious billionaire they didn't recognize. Vance turned around to see what everyone was looking at. When his eyes met mine, his face didn't just drain of color, it completely malfunctioned. He blinked rapidly, his brain furiously trying to reconcile the image of the dripping, pathetic street trash he had kicked out of his office with the radiant, breathtaking woman standing in front of him. Miss Miller, Vance whispered, his voice cracking loudly in the sudden silence of his circle. He stumbled slightly, his scotch splashing onto his cuff. How did you get in here? Security. Relax. Arthur, I said, my voice smooth, loud and echoing with absolute authority. I'm not here to ask for a pro bono favor. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single, heavy legal folder stamped with the blood-red seal of Covington and Hayes. The entire immediate area went dead silent. The billionaires leaning in to listen knew the reputation of that seal. It meant an execution was about to happen. I stepped right up to Vance, the height of my heels bringing me eye to level with his pale, sweating face. I dropped the heavy legal folder squarely onto his chest. He reflexively caught it, his hands already beginning to shake. I told you there was a routing error with my money. Arthur, I said, my voice dripping with venomous satisfaction, loud enough for every single one of his elite clients to hear. I never said I didn't have the $88 million. I just needed to see if you were actually a human being, or just a parasite in a cheap suit. Von Segaspith, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically to his clients, who were now looking at him with intense, sudden disgust. You lied to me, and then I used that money to make a few investments, I continued, stepping even closer, forcing him to back up. Open the folder. Arthur, look at the letterhead. With trembling, numb fingers, Vance flipped open the folder. His eyes scanned the top document. It was a formal notice of immediate foreclosure and debt call. What is Ronin Holdings? He choked out, his eyes wide with absolute, primal terror. I am Ronin Holdings, I whispered coldly, delivering the final, devastating blow. I bought your $12 million mortgage from Apex Capital. I bought the lien on your yacht. I even bought the commercial lease for your firm's penthouse office. I own your debt. Arthur, I own your life. And as of 5:00 p.m. today, I am officially calling in the debt. The words hung in the air of the grand ballroom like a guillotine blade that had just been dropped. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The string quartet in the corner of the room was still playing a soft port from Send. Elegant Waltz. Completely oblivious to the absolute financial execution that was taking place on the marble floor, Arthur Vance stared at the notice of foreclosure in his trembling hands. His custom Italian leather shoes suddenly seemed too heavy to lift. The smug, untouchable senior partner who had ordered security to throw me out into the freezing rain was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, pathetic, terrified old man who had just realized his entire universe was collapsing. 22 million. Vance stammered, his voice reduced to a wet, desperate wheeze. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and completely bloodshot. You can't do this. I don't have that kind of liquidity. If you call in this debt, I will lose my house. I will lose my firm's office lease by Monday. The board will strip me of my partnership. I'll have nothing. I know, I said smoothly, taking a slow sip from a glass of champagne a passing waiter had offered me. You have exactly 48 hours to produce $22, 5 million in cash. Arthur, otherwise, I seize your assets. I trigger a complete financial liquidation, and I evict you from your own penthouse. Consider this your notice of eviction. The irony of the word eviction hit him like a freight train. Vance looked around frantically, turning to the billionaire hedge fund managers he had just been laughing with. He reached out to grab one of their arms. Richard, please, you know me. Float me a bridge loan. Just until the end of the quarter. I'm good for it. The billionaire named Richard physically recoiled, pulling his arm away as if Vance were infected with a highly contagious disease. In the ultra-wealthy circles of the elite, financial ruin is the ultimate sin. Nobody wanted to be standing next to a sinking ship. Don't touch me, Arthur, Richard muttered coldly, adjusting his cuffs. You're toxic. Excuse me, on a bewan. His elite clients, his investors, and his so-called friends turned their backs on him and walked away, completely abandoning him in the middle of the ballroom. Vance's knees literally buckled. He dropped to the floor, kneeling on the pristine marble in his $10,000 suit. Right at my feet. Please, he begged, tears of pure humiliation streaming down his red, blotchy face. Please. Miss Miller? I was wrong. I am an arrogant, foolish old man. Please don't destroy me. I'll give you a 50% stake in the firm. I'll make you a senior partner in name. Just give me more time. I looked down at him. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. I just felt a cold, satisfying sense of balance. I don't want your toxic law firm, Arthur, I said, my voice echoing across the silent room. But I am willing to offer you a settlement, one single alternative to absolute bankruptcy. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a second document, sliding it out of the red folder. You are going to sign a legally binding contract of servitude, I announced, holding the paper up. You will complete exactly 1,000 hours of pro bono legal representation for the Midtown Homeless Shelter. You will sit in their basement, on a folding metal chair, and you will represent the very street trash you despise so much. You will fight their unfair evictions. You will handle their small claims disputes. And you will pay for all of their legal filing fees entirely out of your own pocket. Vance stared at me, his jaw trembling. 1,000 hours. In a homeless shelter, if you miss a single hour. I leaned down, my voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. If you roll your eyes at a single client, if I hear a rumor that you spoke to a broke, desperate person with even a fraction of the arrogance you showed me, I will immediately trigger the foreclosure, and I will personally make sure you end up sleeping on the exact same pavement you tried to throw me onto. Do we have a deal? Vance looked at the document. He looked at his shattered reputation. He had no choice. Yes, he sobbed, his head bowing in total defeat. Yes, I accept. I didn't hand him a heavy, gold-embossed Mont Blanc fountain pen. I reached into my purse, pulled out a cheap, chewed-up, 99-cent plastic ballpoint pen, and dropped it onto the floor in front of him. Then sign. He picked up the cheap plastic pen with shaking hands and signed his life away on the marble floor. That was Friday night. By Monday morning, I was back in my freezing, dilapidated studio apartment, wearing my comfortable thrift store hoodie, packing my few meager belongings into cardboard boxes. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the heavy, aggressive pounding on my door started. I opened it to find Gary, my greasy, cigar-smoking slumlord. He was holding a crowbar and a smug, predatory grin. Time's up, Sweetheart, Gary sneered, blowing a cloud of stale smoke into my face. Got my $500, or am I dragging your computer out to the dumpster right now? I didn't panic. I just smiled, reached into my pocket, and handed him a crisp, freshly notarized legal document. What's this? Gary laughed. Not taking it. A fake cease and desist. No, Gary, I replied calmly. It's the $4. 2 million deed to this entire apartment building. I bought it directly from your parent holding company yesterday afternoon in cash. They were thrilled to liquidate a failing asset. Gary's smug grin vanished. He looked down at the deed. He saw my name legally stamped as the sole owner of the property. The cigar literally fell out of his mouth, bouncing off his heavy boots. You're fired, Gary, I said, my voice perfectly light and cheerful. Pack up your office downstairs and get off my property in 10 minutes. Or, I'm calling the police to have you arrested for criminal trespassing. Watching Gary scramble down the hallway like a terrified rat was the perfect start to my new life. I didn't just evict him. I immediately lowered the rent for every single struggling family in that building by 40%, and I hired a premier contracting firm to fix the heating, the plumbing, and the broken windows. As for me, I didn't buy a mega mansion or a private jet. I bought a beautiful, comfortable loft overlooking the city. I officially founded Ronin Games Studio, a massive incubation hub designed entirely to fund, support, and legally protect desperate indie developers who just needed a chance to change the world. True wealth isn't about crushing the people beneath you. True wealth is having the absolute, undeniable power to ensure that nobody can ever crush you again. And if I ever need a reminder of that, all I have to do is take a walk past the Midtown homeless shelter. Sometimes, I look through the basement window, and I see Arthur Vance. He's usually sweating in his ruined designer suit, sitting on a cheap metal chair, politely and desperately helping a single mother fight a $500 eviction notice. It turns out, he really is a fantastic lawyer when he has a gun to his head. Before you go, hit that subscribe button, and tell me down in the comments if you suddenly had an $88 million black card. What exact chore would you force an arrogant billionaire to do for you? I read every single one. See you in the next story.